The hands had worn bangles. Maya thought that the merry-go-round seat was a little too high. She was helped reluctantly onto the high seat, and as she settled down, she thought that the seat was rather hard to be seated on for a long time. Someone strapped her onto the seat, and slowly the merry-go-round started moving. As the merry-go-round gathered speed, Maya thought, maybe I should not have gotten onto this contraption. Is it safe? Oh my god, is it safe? These thoughts ran on in her mind. The second thought was that, no, I can do it, and I need to do it. As the merry-go-round gathered speed, she grabbed the handles of the seat on both sides with both her hands. She loosened her hold but once again gripped the sides of the seat and tightened the hold as the merry-go-round went faster and faster. Oh, yes, I can. No, no, I cannot. And suddenly Maya could not take it any more. Her head began to spin. She shut her eyes tightly and in her mind she was screaming, stop, stop, please stop, let me out. Let me off this merry-go-round. I cannot take it any more. She was screaming loudly when she suddenly opened her eyes and realized that she was lying down and was not on the merry-go-round anymore. It took a moment for her to gather her thoughts. Where was she? Had she been screaming? Her thoughts went to where she was. She could feel the movement of the train as it chugged along the rails. There was a huge and sudden relief when she realized where she was, sleeping on a berth in a moving train. Had she been screaming loudly? Obviously not, because there was absolute quiet in the compartment around her. What a relief, she thought. She grabbed the white and light bedsheet that was covering her and scrubbed her forehead and neck to wipe away the little beads of sweat that had gathered in her frenzy. Maya tried turning her head around to look out the window and found that the day was breaking. It was dawn and wasn't completely daylight yet. The train, moving along at a fast pace, made the top of the trees swing past urgently. Maya decided to wake up and finish her morning ablutions before the other passengers in the train could occupy the stinky little bathroom at the end of the coach. She sat up in her seat and realized that she was sleeping on the lowest berth in the compartment. She groped around with her feet for her slippers with her right foot, found one but not the other. Grabbing the bedsheet with one hand and pushing it aside, she slowly got up, holding on to the upper berth for balance, and then looked around. It was still a little dark, and inside the coach there seemed to be more darkness than outside. She groped around with her foot and finally found her other slipper, adjusting both the slippers on her feet and gathered her toothbrush and toothpaste tube from her overnight bag. Her hand touched the vacuum flask holding her morning coffee, and Maya smiled. That was something to look forward to. She hung her bag on the little hook that was provided, and holding onto the upper berths, she moved into the corridor, stood for a while, deciding which end of the corridor was better for her to use the restroom. She turned left and, still holding on to the upper berths for gathering balance, she walked towards the restroom. The train suddenly jerked and sent her pitching forward, but she managed to steady herself by grabbing the nearest berth. She opened the swinging door and found a young man using his cell phone and looking out of the door near the restroom. There was a duffel bag nestled at his feet, and he kept glancing at his watch as he spoke. Maya thought that he lowered his voice as she emerged from the compartment. An edge of a blanket peeped from the opening of the bag. The restroom seemed to be empty. That's a relief, Maya thought. Clever of me to have woken up early. Once finished and outside, Maya let down her jeans, which she had held with her right hand, as she emerged from the restroom. She approached a small wash basin just outside the restroom. She decided to brush her teeth before others could make a rush for the wash basin. There was a hazy little mirror on top of the wash basin, and Maya stared at herself in the hazy mirror, smoothing down her pink kurta, which had creased in her sleep, with her hands. Suddenly, she saw a white hair on her right temple, and involuntarily her right hand went to her right temple and she checked her reflection in the mirror. May your tribe increase. She smiled inwardly at the white hair. At 58, Maya did not really look her age, but the signs of aging were already there as the white hair on her temple. She smoothed down her hair and looked for more white hair on her left temple. There were fine lines of aging under her eyes and around her mouth. Yet I can pass off for someone at 50, Maya thought inwardly. The mirror was a little lower than Maya's 5 foot 6 inches, who stood as a graceful figure in front of the low mirror. At the little basin outside the restroom, she wasn't very comfortable because the air around was thick with the smell of old urine. Why aren't people considerate about others using the restroom? She thought. The young man using his cell phone had disappeared. Holding on to the berths for support again, she made her way back to her sleeping berth and sat down, letting her slippers slide onto the ground, pulling her legs up and under the bedsheet, and decided to go back to sleep. Sleep evaded her. The moment she closed her eyes, she was once again on the merry-go-round, but now it was swinging slowly, just like the motion of the train. A similar feeling of dread surrounded her, the feeling she had before she had woken up. It was a very unpleasant sensation, especially because she just did not like the experience of being swung around when things were not in her control. I would rather drive my car very fast. I am a rash driver, she thought. I do not mind sitting on the merry-go-round if I could drive, Maya thought, provided I can use the brakes, but in a merry-go-round there are no brakes. That was a thought, and Maya smiled a little to herself at her own thoughts. What if the merry-go-round were to be driven by me and had brakes, and I could stop it when I chose to, was what she thought. It wasn't as if Maya had always been scared of the merry-go-round. She had realized that the merry-go-round was not for her when she had first come back from abroad. She had gone with her sister into an exhibition with various games and had involuntarily been coaxed onto the merry-go-round seat by her sister. As the merry-go-round had gathered space, Maya had started panicking without a reason. The panic had steadily increased and finally amounted to her screaming and wanting the merry-go-round to stop to get out. The operator had been dumbstruck. A simple merry-go-round that a grown woman could not handle? Well, strange things happened at his workplace all the time. She had created such a scene that people had gathered around, and her sister was thoroughly embarrassed by what she had done. If you did not want to sit, then why do you do so? Was what her sister had said in anger. Well, Maya herself was not aware of the fact that a small merry-go-round could scare her, but as the contraption gathered speed, all she could think of were the uniformed soldiers with bayonets and their muddy, sandy boots which had trekked through the desert. They had entered her apartment on that fateful morning. There was the noise of rifles shooting in her brain, and her mind had refused to allow herself to be seated on the merry-go-round. Diwali had scared her too. She had woken up early morning and run around saying, "Rifle fire, rifle fire." Well, that was the first and the last time that Maya had attempted to sit on a merry-go-round. Even looking at a swinging or a revolving merry-go-round set her off, made her nauseous. She had tried very hard to get the memories out of her mind, but some events seemed to trigger the memories to come back. Maya could not sleep. She wanted to look out at nature and feel better, so she got up holding the upper berth for support. She gathered her bed sheets and the blanket that the railways had provided. She neatly folded one of the two bed sheets, the blanket and the pillow, and stacked it at the end of the berth where she had kept her legs when sleeping. On second thought, she gathered the pillow and kept it in a position where she could sit comfortably and look out the window. Covering herself with one light bedsheet, She gazed out of the window. Daylight was breaking slowly, and the train was at that point of time passing through some very green fields. The crops in the fields were about 3 feet high and swayed gently in the early morning breeze. It was a very soothing feeling. Suddenly, there was a bridge and a river flowing under it. The sight of the blue flowing water made Maya feel very peaceful. Her thoughts floated to her family who was waiting for her on her return. Bangalore was just a day away and then she would be home. This was what Maya thought. But what had nature planned for her was a thought to hold. Maya suddenly felt a little twist in her back. She thought she should rest and once again lay down. She covered herself with the bedsheet and adjusted her pillows so that she could keep looking out of the window. The rolling of the train lulled her into a light sleep. Maya was dreaming. She had bought some fried snacks from a vendor on a platform through the train window the previous evening. Once she had eaten, she had smoothened the paper in which the snacks had been wrapped. She had always been a voracious reader, reading whatever paper that got into her hands. Though the paper was torn, Maya read an article about a village which had been plundered by dacoits. The article spoke about how the men from that village had gathered themselves into a group and retaliated, harming the dacoits badly. These men had also gathered together and helped the people of a train which the dacoits had attacked, but the dacoits had traced the men back to their village. The dacoits had taken revenge. They had attacked the village, ensuring that most of the able bodied men had been beaten up with broken limbs or killed brutally. The article had a photograph of the women folk of the same village. There was a stunned look on their faces and yet a strange way about them which Maya could not decipher. Colorful long skirts, long sleeved blouses, hands filled with bangles. They were huddled together, sitting on the ground with anklets worn bare feet, holding each other, leaning against each other almost as if seeking support from each other. Many of them with a sudden realization that they were widowed. In the distance were laid the dead bodies of the men whom the dacoits had killed. There had not been tears but a sad silence in the poignant photograph. By the side of these women stood a lady police officer, probably an IPS officer by the looks of her, Maya had thought. The newspaper was at least a year old. Suddenly there was a realization in Maya that the train was possibly passing through the same region where the dacoits had attacked trains previously. The railway police had been very vigilant about these dacoits and probably were on the train, Maya thought as she dozed. She relived the photograph. Maya dreamt all this as the train lulled her again into a mild sleep. Suddenly, the train squealed to a sudden halt and Maya was woken up. There is no railway station here, she thought, and removed the bedsheet which was covering her face to look out the window. All that she could see were dry plains with a few dry fields, but no platform. Why had the train stopped here? Her thoughts were broken by the screaming of men who were shouting in the local language. They shouted for the people to not raise their voices, to not scream. There were a few muffled screams from the passengers before they were all told to shut up. Dacoits seemed to have boarded the train. There were various voices, and Maya thought that perhaps there were more than 2 or 3, roughly speaking, men by the sound of their voices. They shouted in the local language for people to hand over their valuables into the bags they carried. Maya slowly covered her face with the bedsheet so that she could barely see a little bit of what was going on in the compartment. The day was still breaking and the compartment did not yet have full daylight. There was a sudden awareness in her that in the berths above her everything seemed extremely quiet and silent, But now the silence was deafening. Maya thought that she too should stay immobile, pretending to be asleep. Suddenly, one of the men, screaming loudly in the local language for people to empty their valuables into his bag, and sporting a revolver, came into her sight. He was covered in a blanket and had covered his face with a kind of mask that showed only his eyes. The rough, grating voice was enough to frighten anyone into silence. The merry-go-round had started moving in Maya's mind. It was spinning fast now. There was no one speaking on the train except the sound of the dacoits shouting, and it created a great sense of fear and apprehension in the atmosphere. Maya lay frozen, her mind screaming as the merry-go-round spun faster and faster, but no sound came from her mouth. Maya slowly watched as one of the dacoits came inside her compartment, brandishing his gun and shouting for them to wake up and give him all their valuables. When the dacoit reached near her, all of a sudden Maya saw hands reaching out from the upper compartment to the dacoit. The hands seized the revolver, shut the mouth of the dacoit, and he was lifted up bodily into the left side of the compartment above Maya. There were muffled struggles and total silence, all in a matter of a few seconds. Frozen already, Maya could not believe what she saw. Suddenly, another dacoit came screaming and running, and from the place in which he was running, the hands reached out again. The same hands covered his mouth, and once again he was lifted bodily upward onto the right side of the upper berth, and Maya could hear some silent struggle ensuing. In a while, everything was quiet. The whole compartment, including Maya, was engulfed in a gloomy silence. By this time, Maya, still frozen, watched in stunned silence. She could still see no figures in the berths above her, except hands. They had reached out, and the same fate awaited the remaining bandits as had happened to the previous two. Suddenly, a cloth was flung on Maya's face. She felt hands reaching out to her neck. They seemed to be feeling for some kind of pulse or some kind of nerve, and there was some pressure on her neck. Suddenly, darkness surrounded Maya. There was a circle of light that she could see from within her closed eyes, and the circle became smaller and smaller as the darkness engulfed her, and suddenly Maya lost consciousness. When she awoke and opened her eyes, Maya realized that she was in a sitting position. She had to shake her head to collect her thoughts and for the memories to flow back to her. She was gripping her vacuum flask tightly in her right hand, with the strap wrapped around her wrist. The flask had dents, with blood stains on it. Maya looked at her left hand, which was lying limp on her lap. She realized that she was seated quite comfortably with pillows backing her, cross-legged on her own berth. Maya looked up. On the berth opposite to her were 5 dacoits, all huddled together, unconscious, as though sleeping. It was the lower berth opposite to where Maya had slept. These dacoits were still in their masks. They had big gashes on their forehead, which looked as if they had come from the flask in Maya's hands. They were all unconscious, and the blankets that they had earlier worn were strewn all around them. Suddenly, there was a sound of boots approaching as the police came running. They came hurriedly to the compartment where Maya was sitting, and all of them stopped in shock and surprise, watching her. Maya stared at them blankly. Lady constables were then prizing the flask from her hand. She was helped to unfold her legs and sit comfortably next to a lady constable. People were chattering around her, but Maya was oblivious of what they were speaking. She had started shivering slowly. She was given some water to drink. People were talking louder and louder, but Maya could only hear the incomprehensible din all around her. She watched as the dacoits seemed to start stirring. The tempo of the movement of the train was changing, and Maya looked outside to see that they were slowing down into a railway station as the platform steadily started to come into view. The train ground to a halt. Maya was escorted by the two women constables out of the train. She got down the steps of the train slowly and shakily stepped onto the platform. There was a crowd gathered and they all started clapping when they saw her. Maya was suddenly a heroine. She, a somewhat frail lady in her 50s, had captured four armed dacoits with her vacuum flask. People were alighting from the train from all doors. The dacoits were staggeringly led by the police towards the exit as some other policemen made way for them through the crowd. The crowd stood at a distance and watched as Maya was made to sit on a railway platform seat. People were filming her with their cell phones. A lady constable gave her a cup of coffee. Maya gratefully sipped on the coffee surrounded by policemen and people who were clapping and saying that this is the kind of brave lady we want in our country. People were trying to take photographs of Maya as she sipped her coffee. Seeing her shivering still, one of the policemen put a blanket around her and Maya sat huddled in that blanket. She held the blanket close to her chest with one hand as she sipped the coffee in the other. My name is Maya, and Maya means magic. Yet, I have never done anything magical. But today, the magic in my name has happened. But how? What could I have done for this to happen? How could such feat happen at all? Slowly she raised her head to see people alighting, and among them saw three village women get off the train. They had bare feet with a ring type of anklets, and Maya, at the back of her mind, realized that the dresses they were wearing were akin to the dresses she had seen in the photograph in the newspaper the previous night. As Maya stared at them, unmindful, the women started walking away. Suddenly, the tallest of these women turned around and winked at Maya, turned away and walked along with the others, shouldering their cloth bags. Maya could not believe her eyes. Did that woman really wink at me? She thought. It was as if it had never happened, and the women walked away towards the exit and were lost in the crowd. Maya sat still on her seat, coffee in her hand, clutching the blanket around her, still shivering, and thought, did the woman really wink at me? And then Maya remembered. The hands that lifted the dacoits bodily from the floor to the upper berths had worn bangles.